We're talking about the ethics of incarceration and rehabilitation. And I think any time that you have a conversation that relates to prison, it makes people, even like myself, somewhat squeamish. I'd much prefer, when we grow up in the community, to hear stories of the purely righteous and the purely holy. Hear stories of great rabbis, create stories of people who dedicated their lives to spreading Torah. And I wanted to begin by posing a question first to Rabbi Lipskar. Why is it that you decided to establish Aleph? Why not, let's keep the Jewish community nice and clean. Somebody committed a crime, let them pay the price. But why associate our community with a community of people who have committed crimes?
It's a very good question. Firstly, it was not my idea. It was the Lubavitcher Rebbe's idea. He put it forth, and I just heard it. It resonated with me, and he was extremely appreciative that I offered to take his ideas and try to move them forward. But to say why, what was the fundamental reason, which is something you just mentioned a minute ago, and you said most people feel a little squeamish talking about people in prison. We like to talk about righteous people. Well, that in itself begs the question, who's righteous? How do you know who's righteous? There were more than 50,000 people over the years that have been imprisoned for using cannabis. Today, people are making money on it legally. Should those people have been in prison? In 1950, I met with two gentlemen. One was a doctor who was put in prison in the 1960s for doing abortions. He had a very high-class abortion clinic in the city. And he was very philanthropic, and he had names on different buildings, and he gave money to hospitals, etc. And he was very respected. And the government went after him, took years, spent a lot of money, and not only did they take away his license, but they put him into prison for a couple of years. He came out of prison, and he kind of didn't know what to do. He couldn't be a doctor anymore, and he couldn't work for another doctor because he didn't like their styles. And he ended up living in a small room with a bulb over his head because he had no other benefits. A second guy was the second person in this meeting was a very high-class bond trader. I'm not going to mention names here, but he's very publicly known, who was put into prison in the 1980s for committing insider trading. And again, got a very tough sentence, initially 10 years, then came down to 3 years. And we worked with both of these men. And they sat together and they said, you know, Rabbi, one thing that really is baffling to me. The guy who was put in prison for abortion, he said, if I would have done what I did in the end of the 1980s, not only would not I have gone to prison, but the government would have sent the police to protect my abortion clinic. And the guy is this heavy investor, very heavy, very internationally renowned. And he said, and if I did my thing in the 1960s, that's the way they did business. After the bell rang, they went into the back room, and they talked about what's going public tomorrow. That's how they turn on the cigars. So he says, it's not what I did was wrong, it's the time that I lived was wrong.
Rabbi Lipskar, I want to push you a little bit on that because there's definitely true, and I love what you first said about who knows what is truly righteous, but undoubtedly there are people in prison who are supposed to be in prison. And I want to draw out from you something that you once told me in the past, which I think is so important. I want to set this up before we speak to our other esteemed panelists. And that is, okay, so not everybody was rightfully put in prison, but surely there are people who are in prison. There was an analogy that you shared with me that I want to draw out again. those people who are in prison, they committed a crime. It's a crime whether in the 1950s, the 1850s, or in 2050. It's going to be a crime. But still, you make an effort to provide them with their material needs, their spiritual needs in prison. Why spend time? We have a limited amount of resource on a population that are criminals.
Well, think about the Rebus Perspective. This was a radical departure from the general norm. To think about, there's no other Jewish organization that took that in a serious way. When we came on to the program, there was, B'nai B'rith did a little bit of work, but it was nothing serious in that matter. And all of a sudden, the Rebbe said, every single person created by God is here for a purpose. Every person. Some people are created to dig ditches. Other people are created to do neurosurgery. Everything person has a purpose. For a person to not allow that person to fulfill his purpose is to go against God's wishes. And that's why it's interesting that in the Torah, of all punishments, you have capital punishment, you have financial punishments, you have service for other people to make money to pay the plaintiff, you have corporal punishment, lashes, but you don't have prison, which is the default punishment in America. Every prison is a default. They don't look for constructive or creative programs. So the Rebbe said a person in prison, you have to look at him as part of the universal reality. He is part of your world. The guy that's in the bottom of the ship drilling a hole in his room and water filling up, he can't say to him, hey, by the way, stop drilling a hole. He says, it's my room, but I'm on that same boat. We are on the same boat. When you want to look at society, you don't look at society in terms of the hierarchy of society. You look at the society of the lowliness of society. Like I mentioned to you then,
exactly.
The Rebbe said, when you want to lift a building, you don't hold it from the top by a crane and lift it up because the building will fall in half. You put a lever under the foundation and you lift the bottom an inch and the top lifts an inch.
That is incredibly moving, and that analogy has stayed with me really my entire life, lifting from the bottom wherever a person is and lifting up the entire building. I want to turn to our other esteemed panelist, Dr. Yehudah Pryce. Yehudah, you obviously have been on an incredible journey, and I'm wondering if you could take me back, not in your entire journey, I want you to take me back to a moment. Take me back to the moment, if it was in fact a moment, where you decided, you're sitting, I believe you're in prison, and you decided to reimagine the future of your life, to associate and build a life of Torah and mitzvos. Tell me what you remember. Was that a specific moment? What was happening that would awaken you to reinvent and reimagine the very identity of who you are?
So I wouldn't say it was one specific moment or experience. It was multiple moments, and I think it was a culmination of sorts. To change your life while in prison, we first got to understand, what are prisons actually, right? What do they do? Are they conducive to rehabilitation, to change? Or do they kind of inculcate a sort of criminal ethos that is in more sort of ideas of how to commit criminality? And also there's a survival mechanism in prison where you develop the ability to be aggressive and confrontational to survive, though. It's not maladaptive, it's actually adaptive in that space. And so when I was in that space, I was comfortable to a certain extent, as much as you could be comfortable in a maximum security prison. And to change from the norms that I was around could maybe invite harm to me, right? If they see that I'm trying to change, that could be perceived as a weakness. So there wasn't really a drive just to change, and also how the laws were set up. Because we delineate between nonviolent and violent crimes, there's a tendency to say, we'll lock people up for as long as humanly possible. And so California, what they did is said you have to serve 85%. And it doesn't matter what you accomplish in prison, you can't earn 1 day off your sentence, right? So there was no really incentive to do it. it was more so, it was a couple different circumstances. My sister spoke to me about me not being there. It's my younger sister, to watch her graduate high school, potentially graduate college, get married. And I made those choices on my own. Nobody forced me to do that. And she also spoke of how my actions affected my mother and the rest of the family. And, I realized that during my adolescent years, I was in my own world, selfish, not thinking about others, more so caught up in how other people perceive me, and me wanting to respond to that. So when she wrote me that letter, it was a particular poignant letter that really impacted me. It wasn't enough by itself, and I think it was just me being around people long enough where I'm having conversations and I'm understanding that none of us really committed to this lifestyle because it was the most rational thing to do, obviously. But a lot of things happened to us, and we didn't respond in the best sorts of way. Now, some of us, it was a lot harder. There's a lot of people come from broken homes and not a lot of sort of supports to help them if they needed help. And if there was an ability to respond differently, would we respond differently? So I kind of looked around myself at a point in time and said, you know what? We're losing at life. This is not the way to do it. Now, the change I decided to make wasn't immediate. It wasn't, I'm giving up criminality. It was more so, I want to better myself as a person, and we'll see where this process leads me. And it was a little bit later, as I already started working on myself, and I like to say I was playing hokey pokey. I had 1 foot in, 1 foot out. All right, still might dibble and dabble in criminality, but I was trying. And during this exploration, and I wanted to do it without religion because I was against, one, I knew it would be perceived as a weakness, and I didn't want to follow a stereotype either of you go to jail and you become religious. And then I met a rabbi. And I would say this, it was through Judaism, right? It was through, and it's...
Just pause. Why were you meeting with a rabbi?
To argue with them and tell them how wrong his religion was, of course. So I was very, as I mentioned, confrontational because that was what my environment was, and I wanted to be up to the challenge, and I was argumentative in nature. And so I would argue with people about tenets of their religion, right? Based on whatever sort of theological framework they subscribe to, that's what I would use as the basis to probe and try to undermine your belief system. I was a jerk. I'm not claiming to be.
We all have good days and bad days.
Yeah, I had a lot of bad days. Right? So that's what I was known for. I studied religion, and I was known for, there was cases, and I don't say this with pride, but just so you understand who I was, is that I would run off volunteers who would, volunteer to, maybe they're at the J Witness Chapel or whatever it is, and I would run them off by my, incessant questions. Well, if you believe this, how can you believe that? And I was agnostic. And so when I heard they hired a rabbi, my friend invited me to go there to argue. So that was it wasn't to, for some personal change and personal development and growth or me seeking a spiritual connection. It was me to undermine a spiritual connection, if anything.
Was there a moment or a conversation where you realized it was starting to turn? Where he is telling you something, you've been involved, you're hearing so many from other religions. Religion from a distance is so easy to dismiss because it's a caricature. It's so easy. I could imagine why someone would dismiss religion if you're not born into it, if you're not living it. What was the point where you realized this might be real?
Well, I mean, when he told me to look at the history of the Jewish people and just to understand that Judaism has worked for the Jewish people. Simple, it might even be a secular argument right there, right? But I looked at it in a little different light. I looked at it as, wait, no, the Jewish people have been persecuted for thousands of years, whatever land they're at, but they have managed to maintain their identity, their culture, their language, and eventually their homeland. And to me, and people just persecuting for what? Various reasons that they made up. The Jewish people became, for me, the evidence that God existed. And so it at least sparked the curiosity that I wanted to explore through the Jewish lens.
That is incredibly holy. It is something that I've thought about constantly. The ultimate expression that's quoted in the Zohar of Yisroel Oraisav Kuchabrichu Chadhu, that the Jewish people, the Torah, and God are all one. That, so to speak, our survival, our resilience through history is an expression of divinity through history. That's really incredible, and I want to come back. I want to turn to Rabbi Lipskar for a moment. I don't know so much about prison. I'm very thankful. I've never been to prison, and I still, unfortunately, have never visited a prison. And I hope you can help me rectify that, because it's something I want to do. But I wanted to know, absent of abolishing the prison system, which I don't know how realistic that is in the United States, what do you think is the number one piece of advocacy that not just the Jewish community, but American citizens, people should be made aware of, that we need to change about the current state of prison?
It's a very good question, and for information, anybody who's following criminal justice reform, you know that there's been some radical moves in the criminal justice environment with the Department of Justice, otherwise, and we're right on top there. We meet with the Sentencing Commission, with the directors of the bureaus, etc. And there's been a rethinking pattern of how to deal with that matter. But to answer that question, I'm just going to go back for a minute to what you asked me earlier about the Rebus Perspective, because, I'm talking here I don't think there's anybody in this room that's sitting here that's in prison except for us, the two of us up here, my family, and Sandy, and you. I'm saying, but none of you have been in prison like Dr. Pryce has been in prison. You never experienced prison. You knew you were coming out. But when you go in and you don't know you're coming out, it's a whole different experience. So you have someone here that can talk through their own experience. But for that matter, you ask yourself a question, except for information. I don't think too many of you are going to get involved in criminal justice reform, because that doesn't happen too much in the Jewish community. Why are you interested in this program? Just to know some stuff that's very exotic, that's very strange, that's squeamish, that, when you open the newspaper, you hear about someone in prison, that's the article you go to first, not about the economics. The reason is because it does pertain to us. And this was the Rebus Perspective. And this is radical. It's very important to understand. The Rebbe said the following: why does God, who loves his children, without question, like a love that we don't even understand, a selfless, unconditional love, under any circumstances, Hashem loves us. How does God, who cares about us so deeply, send his child, his chosen child, his beloved child, to prison? Why did God make that happen? Most people don't even ask that question, because in our mind, they deserve it. But from a point of view, but the mother of that child doesn't think they deserve it. And Hashem is our daddy. So and he has the power not to send us to prison. So why does he? So there's a more fundamental question. The Rebbe says as follows: when the soul came down to this world, this holy soul that lived under the godly throne, peace of God himself, and the soul looks at this world and he says, oh my God, don't send me into that garbage can. Please, not that. The seductions of the world, the physical things. I'm going to start thinking differently. What do you think about this world? Pleasure, instant gratification, entitlement? Or do you think about God? The subconscious moment. Do you think about yourself? So the Shema says, no, please. Hashem says, you got to go down, because I created the world in order for you to make the downstairs a holy space. And so he sends his child into Gullus, like we have been for 2,000 years in exile, and still continue to be in exile. And then the Rebbe said there's an exile within an exile. The soul, first exile is the soul in the body. That's the first exile. The second exile is the soul in Gullus, like we are today, in the Middle East, wherever we are, endangered, scared. Someone told me that the largest grouping of the former discussions was anti-Semitism. October 7th, people didn't wake up because they thought, oh my God, Judaism is so great, I got to save it. They're scared. They woke up with fear, not with love, not with commitment, with fear. The wrong reason, absolutely wrong reason. So the Rebbe said that's a second gullus. That's a gullus, that's exile within exile, within exile. First the soul and the body, and then the body in exile. And then the Rebbe said, and there's a third exile, prison. That's exile within exile, within exile. It's the darkest place you can be. He says, why does God send you there? He says, God sends him there because only special souls have the capacity to be able to take that lowly space and bring some meaning into it. Most people don't have that capacity. Take a look at Dr. Pryce. You're talking about a guy that you would say, keep in prison forever, this guy. He's dangerous to society. And today, you guys say, he spoke so great, he's so wonderful, so mensch. The Rebbe said, every single human being has a purpose and meaning. Everybody. And therefore, when we look at a Jew, wherever he is in exile, we can't say he deserves to be in exile, because would you say that about yourself? Do I deserve to be in exile? I'd say no. But I deserve to be in exile because God put me there. But there's a reason for it. So that's a first stage. Now, once there's prisons, because the Rebbe said there should be, prison is not a punishment in the Torah, even though it's a default, but it's not a punishment in the Torah. Why? Because a person in prison is a suspended animation. He's not alive. I'm going to give you a simple example. Take about a minute for example. You know, I've been working in this environment since 1981. It's a long time. I've probably interacted with maybe over general interaction, visiting prisons. I used to visit prisons all the time. Once, I probably should visit 50 prisons a year. And you tell you without question, and in those environments, Jews are looking for something. And when you go into the prison environment, the Rebbe said, this case happened where a mother was having a problem with her son, a teenager. She comes to her husband, she's complaining, he doesn't listen to me, he comes in any time of the night, he's impudent, he says, I'm scared of him, he's hanging around with the wrong people. He says, and she says to her husband, I want you to talk to him the next time I come for a visit. So the husband, he knows his son, and he says to his wife, you know, maybe we ask the rabbi to be here with us. I said, yeah, I'll be there. So at visiting day, the father and mother there, he brings the son, and I'm there at the same meeting. And he says, in case we need to have some participation or intervention, you're there. Anyways, the mother comes in with the son. The mother says to the husband, hey, honey, please tell Joey, tell them. And so Joey turns around to the father and says, Dad, I want you to listen to me, and I want you to listen to me carefully. I want you to shut your mouth. Don't tell me one single thing. If you tell me one thing that I don't want to hear, I'm never coming to see you, and I'm taking you off my call list. And I watched that father. And you know, you see somebody sometimes in life that he wished he dropped dead. His face turned white. And he's thinking to himself, I'm his daddy. I can't even discipline him. So prison is an extremely torturous environment. So the Rebbe said, since America has humanity, it's a humane country, and a country that we thank God for, and it gives us opportunity like today. Today, for example, we have in prison, we have over 1,000 prisoners studying Torah every day on a correspondence course, and he'll tell you about that. We have, today, the summertime, we had 40 teams of rabbinical students visit 500 prisons during the summer to make sure that a Jew in the Tuna, New Mexico, which is the heart of anti-Semitism, and they don't even identify as a Jew, and all of a sudden these two young rabbis come in, and they're given respect because the Bureau of Prisons tell them you respect these guys because we were able to manage over 40 years. They kind of realized that we're for real. And so that happens. The Rebbe said we're able to give them spiritual life, and you never know what happens. And so we've made a decision that we supply everything spiritual that these people need. We make sure that there are rabbis during the holidays that go meet them, which means in that environment, we fill them with meaning and purpose, just like we would go to a hospital You find a sick person, this person is maybe emotionally sick. And so we have a responsibility to take care of them, and we do.
It's really, really incredible, and I want to turn to Dr. Pryce, Yehudah. It's very interesting. In Jewish law, if you go and you are sentenced to capital punishment, if you're sentenced to get malkos, to get lashes, or any sort of punishment in Jewish law, and you come in with your eyes closed, with your machzor, your sitter, and you say, I did incredible teshuvah. I'm rehabilitated. You don't have to give me the lashes. You don't have to give me the financial penalty. It's meaningless. You still have to get the punishment. We don't usually look at that teshuvah rehabilitation in the context of the punishments that we have in the Torah. And I'm curious for you, teach me, what allowed you to have sustainable, let's call it what it is, rehabilitation? You changed your life about. What do you think the ingredients are that allowed you to do that?
That's a good question. I'll give you the easy answer, which is Yiddish Kite, just generally speaking. I could give you that I had a mother that provided me with unconditional love even when I didn't deserve it, right? When I let my family down over and over, when people may even approach her and say, maybe you're enabling him, right? She kept the door open. She kept the door open, and that connected me to something that connected me to love, right? There's nothing like a mother's love. The Yiddish Kite, I think, by me constantly involving, you're delving into Torah, you're studying in the morning, you're studying at night.
I just want to jump in because I want you to elaborate a little bit in your story.
Okay.
Yiddish, like you're in the where? You're in the base medrash and you're pouring over
my jail cell. Yeah, that's what we called it. No.
Tell me a little bit about that process of how you got exposed. That's really what I'm asking, to a sustainable vision of Yiddish Kite. And what was it about that journey that allowed it to be so sustainable?
So I think for one thing, I lived a hedonistic lifestyle. I lived a lifestyle where I got to essentially explore whatever my heart desired, and I realized it was empty, right? So I came to that realization. Everything I knew or wanted, I was pursuing shadows. So I knew there was nothing over there, even though it was very enticing. And I recognized that there was a God. I told you, recognized through the Jewish people was the evidence. So I knew there was emes, and I knew there was a path forward in life.
You've been to the abyss. You know there's nothing there. You see that there's something special to the Jewish people. Where do you start? Bereshis, tell me about your learning journey.
So the first book that this rabbi gave me was To Be a Jew, which, just walks you through to be a Jew, right? From morning to night through the life cycle. And so I understood it maybe just on an academic level, because this wasn't, as you can imagine, a robust and thriving Jewish community that I was surrounding myself with. So I understood, maybe more abstractly than anything what it meant. But I remember when I eventually transferred prison and I worked underneath a rabbi as a Jewish chapel clerk for like 6 years. And I remember him saying that Judaism is behavioral modification, right? So, I never thought about ethics in that way. If I think about causing you to be embarrassed is akin to murder, right? Like, you think about that. You started thinking about it more. I wasn't thinking as deeply about what it meant to be alive, what it meant to live a life with purpose, what was life about. I wasn't thinking, and matter of fact, I was trying to avoid that. And you try to avoid that with drugs, with distracting yourself in whatever way you could. And now I wanted to embrace it. And so it was the little things. And again, when I say it was a process, and sometimes there was a little hokey pokey, I had 1 foot in, 1 foot out, because it was just me. But this started in 2010. I didn't get released from prison to 2018 when I could formally enter Orthodox conversion program. So it was a process, but I found that if you constantly are focusing on good things and growing and growth, that's more likely to happen, right? And it's going to happen in stages, but it's going to slowly have that influence. Just like if you surround yourself with people who are doing bad and thinking the wrong things and talking about the wrong things, no matter how good or holy you think you are, that's going to influence you to a degree. So I think by me surrounding it, I read the Parsha every week. I taught myself how to read Hebrew, but it was a painstaking process reading the Parsha in Hebrew every week, overcoming my self-limiting beliefs, saying like, this is stupid. Why don't I just read this in English and get it over with, right? People in prison saying they're not going to accept you when you get out of prison. And me again saying like, you know what? I see the change. I like this change. And this is a life that I could be proud of, even if nobody else recognizes or accepted me. Because I know Hashem, this is the pathway of Hashem, this is the way of God, and this is the way I'm just going to continue on going. And whatever consequences come my way, I didn't care about consequences before, so why would I care about consequences now? And people saw that change. My nickname in prison was Shabbat. I didn't call myself that, but they knew you had the ability to have a nice set of clothing, like you could purchase it, and you usually use that for when you had a visit, right? Your family comes, and when Shabbos was approaching, I'm dressing in my visiting clothes. Where are you going? Oh, it's Shabbat, right? They want to talk about, hey, how much for commissary items or whatever they're talking about. Can't talk about business right now. It's Shabbat, right? Right. So, you're actually cooking. You actually have this meal ready for you. What's going on? It's Shabbat. So people started calling. It's Shabbat, right? And so I would stay on Shabbat on my bunk all day just learning. What else are you going to do, right? And again, I think by me just attaching myself to that, there was a slow and gradual change. And I realized what the rabbi said, that Judaism is behavioral modification. Right? Even every ritual, the rituals allow me, one, to have a relationship with the creator of the universe in my prison cell, right? But when you do concrete things with the right kavanah, with the right intention, right, it's going to have an effect on you. Just like if you daven with intentionality, those words, you're saying chesed, you're saying all these words that they're going to influence you. And I think over time, that's what actually occurred.
Can I just mention one thing, because you asked a very important question.
Absolutely.
And I think it requires an answer. The Rebbe did answer that, and the Torah answers that. You asked the question, what happens if a guy comes and says, well, I am not doing it anymore. You can avoid this punishment. I don't want the lashes. I'm clean, it's okay. And he really is clean. In Jewish life, what we call punishment is not punishment. It's called cleansing. Which means once you make a stain, there are certain ways in which you have to cleanse that stain. So the Torah outlines the mechanisms by which you cleanse that stain. So when the soul goes into its eternity, leaving the body, it leaves without that stain, because to cleanse that stain in the world to come is an extremely painful matter. Like it says 1 minute in the fire of the world to come, whatever that fire means, is like a whole lifetime of fire here. So actually, the way the Torah elucidates these, it's not revenge. It's not getting even with the guy. Mm-hmm. It's not punishing him. It's cleansing him so that he can become part of society in the most clean.
And the very word for kapara, right, which is forgiveness, comes from kippur, which means to wipe off, to clean the stain.
We had a situation when we go to a judge and we ask for alternative sentencing. We've developed a whole alternative sentencing program. Instead of sending him to prison and ruining the family, ruining the wife, ruining the children, ruining the business, ruining his life, do another option. And many judges are starting to accept it because they're being much, much more open-minded. And they're saying, so we take a look at this guy. This guy's I'm saying a radical thief. He just keeps doing over and over again stuff. And he gets out, does it again. So we create an alternative sentencing program, and it's really tough. And in this guy, we realize that he can't just not be in prison. So we say, you got to stay in prison for 2 years. 2 years is not the end of the world. 2 years you can get out in a year and a day, or even less. It's a better sentence than a year. So we take the sentence to him. He says, oh, come on. You're putting me in prison already before I get into prison. I said, listen to me. I said, you're into a real serious matter here. Either you do our thing or not. So this guy, white collar, nice guy, Aleph, how much money do I have to pay? I said, 0. We don't take money from people that we do alternatives for. So they have no influence on us. And the government knows that. I said, forget about that. Anyways, we give it to this lawyer, and he calls me up, and he says, Rabbi, you don't have to come to the sentencing. You don't have to come to sentencing. We got it done. Anyways, 2 days later, he went to sentencing without us. 2 days later, he calls me, what happened? The judge threw the book at me, gave me 8 years. I said, really? He said, he didn't listen to your alternative. I said, sure. I called the lawyer. I said, can you give me an alternative? I look at the alternative, and the one page that says 2 years in prison, they took out because they figured it. You can't be light in an American system where there is prison, like the Rebus said. You can't deny the reality. So you have to work within that environment in a normal fashion. And we do that. So it works.
We have a little bit of time left, and this last question, I mean, sitting with both of you has been such an incredible privilege, but this last question really for you, Dr. Pryce, Yehudah, I want you to, what you represent is something that is so remarkable, which is somebody who was exposed to Judaism absent of Jewish community, which is really remarkable. Usually it's reverse. You meet a lot of Jews and you're not exposed to Judaism. I want you to share, you step out of prison, you said in 2018, and you meet the community that is carrying the traditions that have awakened you and changed your life.
I wrote the rabbi when I was in prison with a 14-page essay from juvenile delinquency to Judaism. He told me the community would love to have me when I got out of prison. I went to this community with as soon as I was in a halfway house, I turned in an application to the RCC, the Rabbinical Council of California, after just doing 16 years in prison, and they accepted me into the program. The community, I didn't know how I was going to move to the community because I was making $10.50 an hour at washing dishes. Somebody in the community said it would be a great idea for me to rent a room from them. Friday nights, family after family invited me into their homes. They didn't hide purses. Well, they wouldn't because it's Shabbos already, so it was already hid. But they treated me as a person that was made in the image of God. Right? If I were to judge Judaism by the Jews, y'all doing good, right? I go to community all across the country, different countries, speaking, and I'm embraced warmly, and I don't take that lightly, because it's not, oh, does he look different or anything like that? It's like, no, he has a history of committing crime, of being a gangster. And I think it's fundamental to Judaism is that we believe in teshuvah, we believe in second chances, we believe in rehabilitation. Yes, it's good for society. It's good if people inside prison, 90-something%, which will be released and go back to your community, that they are rehabilitated, so it creates community safety. But as he said, the Lubavitcher Rebbe spoke about, the main thing is the rehabilitation of that person for that own person's sake. Right? And the Jewish community has been so embracing of me. If I were to offer any sort of anything, it would just be more of an appreciation for why Yiddish Kite is so special. Are we handing down from generation to generation, meticulously handing down this Masorah and this way of living just because, right? Or is it this Masorah? Is it, Hashem's Ratzon? Is it His will? Is it our heritage that we received in the Har Sinai that is it's what at our core is who we are as Jews, right? That covenant and the relationship. Do you appreciate that for what that is, that emes? And I appreciated that when I was in prison. And I appreciate even more now that I've been in the Jewish community, and I want the Jewish community. Some people, might not feel as strongly attached, to understand how special and what they have, right? They are the evidence of God, and so we just need to do more to draw closer and realize our heritage.
Truly incredible. And to come back to the imagery that Rabbi Lipskar began with, we are just about out of time, but for both of you, for your work with Aleph, for you and your life being a testament. You talk about the Jewish people being an evidence for God. I look at you of being evidence for teshuvah, of evidence of the real ability of a neshama, of a soul, to be able to find itself in this world. And to come back to that imagery, I want to thank you both for sharing your character, your ideas, and your honesty, and really lifting up the building, that whatever floor anybody in this crowd may find themselves on, I know from the bottom of my heart, we're all been uplifted. A round of applause for Dr. Pryce, for Rabbi Lipskar.
The Rohr Jewish Learning Institute has the largest collection of Jewish media online. Hit subscribe for more.